Rudy Husny is a former advisor in the Stephen Harper government, political analyst now. So lots of political stories, at least on this side of the border today too, Rudy, which is a nice change. Let's talk about this poll. I think Jason just mentioned this on the news a second ago. The idea that Mark Carney, who, again, worth pointing out, not even officially yet the leader of the Liberal Party, much less the Prime Minister, but if a vote were held today, according to this new poll, it would be a dead heat with Pierre Poilievre. So give me your reaction to that news.
No, it's very, very interesting. I think that now people are reconsidering or at least paying attention to the Liberal Party, to Mark Carney. I mean, even if he hasn't done a lot of interviews because he's been very discreet, only one interview in France, for example, last weekend when he was in Quebec City, but not a lot of media exposure in terms of him doing one-on-one. But I think that people are now, especially that it's a time of crisis, and that he has a good resume. It's for sure. I mean, he's a former governor, Bank of Canada governor, also Bank of England. So I think that slowly people are looking at that. At least there's an alternative because, look, people realized before that they want to change, that Trudeau was kind of at the end of his reign, and people were switching, obviously, to the Conservative. But now, slowly but surely, people are thinking that they can be at least somebody at the Liberal Party who has experience in managing a crisis. But now we're still very, very early. And don't forget, there's always a kind of a honeymoon period, especially when there's a new leader, when people haven't paid a lot of attention because, again, he hasn't been tested either in debates or anything or very, hard or difficult one-on-one interviews. So we'll have to wait and see if this trend is going to confirm in the next at least until the debate and for the upcoming weeks.
Yeah. So for people, by the way, who don't know, the first debate I think is scheduled February 24th. That's in French, followed by an English one on the 25th. Listen, I know we're not writing Chrystia Freeland out of this race, but it seems to me there's a little bit of flailing going on. Now I want you to hear. This is Rudy, I guess put up on Twitter at X, whatever, a post by Chrystia Freeland just today. Listen to this.
I have a message today for President Trump. If you force our hand, we will inflict the biggest trade blow that the United States has ever endured.
Outside of waiting for Khaleesi and Jon Snow to show up at the end of that, I'm curious what you think. I mean, okay, threatening message. But then again, how much weight does that carry?
No, but also she sounds a little bit desperate. I mean, look, she also announced that she will remove, for example, the GST on homes. That was Pierre Poilievre's announcement a few months ago. And I mean, not only is she revisiting all her past announcements and all her past positions, for example, on capital gain and the carbon tax and her last budget, but now all of a sudden. So look, I think that we'll see what happens during the debate, but I think that the establishment of the Liberal Party wants Mr. Carney. You can see now in the polls that obviously Canadians are looking at Carney. So I think that it's done for Ms. Freeland, especially that she's not able to recruit any new members or anything. The cutoff was 2 weeks ago. So now it's just a question of convincing actual Liberal members who are registered. But when you look at all the indication, people will say, hey, we have a better chance of going after the Conservative with Mr. Carney than Madame Freeland.
By the way, the rest of her statement, to your point about the GST and removing it for home buyers, she wants to cut or cap credit card interest rates at 15%. And I said to myself, you've been in power. This is not a new story, by the way. This idea of capping interest rates, which are outrageous for credit cards, right? She wants to cap them at 15%. She has had the opportunity to do that for the last 9 years. Is that fair criticism or not?
Yes. I mean, you can add, hey, what about the phone bills, the cell phone bills? How many times we heard the Liberals think that they were going to lower our invoices when it comes to cell plans? Same for other issues. So that's the problem when you have somebody who's been in power for so long, that people will have that natural reflex of saying, okay, great, it's a good idea. For sure, I would love that. But you were in power for 9 years. You were the finance minister. You were the deputy prime minister. And if I'm Mark Carney, and if I feel a little bit cornered, for example, during the debate, that's exactly what I would say. I say, Ms. Freeland, you had a chance to do it. You didn't put in your last budget. Why would we believe you?
Let me move on and talk about the other big issue, of course, which is the whole Donald Trump situation, those 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel. We know the Canadian premiers, among them,
Yes.
Francois Legault, are in Washington today. What comes out of this? Because, again, what we have here, Rudy, is another 30-day window imposed by Donald Trump yesterday. Now the new cutoff date is March 12th. So what do you think? What do we need to do here?
Look, it's very difficult because, I mean, we know that, especially in Quebec, aluminum is very important. It's a big, big export to the United States. And we just realized, so the trip that Monsieur Legault and other premiers were planning was planned months ahead, before. And now this news about tariff on, especially on aluminum and steel, that is going to come on March 12th. It's very bad for the Canadian economy, obviously, but also it's going to be bad for the U.S. because look, aluminum and steel, they use it, for example, in cars, and they're talking about possibly $1,000 or at least $2,000 for certain models. That is going to be more on cars, the price of cars. So it's going to be a bad news for the U.S. and it's also going to be obviously a bad news for Canada. So look, we'll see what's going to happen. Is it going to be delayed again, or this time it's a hard deadline? We don't know. Premier Legault is doing some meetings. It's very interesting because Premier Legault is facing a lot of criticism because it's actually, I think, the first time in 5 years that he's been to Washington, D.C., meeting with U.S. Folks. And some people are slowly saying, look, you went to France many times, but shouldn't you have spent at least some time in the U.S.? Because, look, it's hard to meet people when you don't know them and asking them, hey, can you please help me, for example, on steel and aluminum, when you haven't basically done your homework, especially compared to Premier, for example, former Premier Jean Charest or even Philippe Couillard, who invested a lot more time in the U.S. or even with U.S. governors. So that's maybe a criticism that François Legault is facing right now and will face when he's going to come back to Quebec.
I'm curious what your take is, Rudy. The one person who seems to be in everyone's face, at least from a Canadian perspective, seems to be Doug Ford.
Yes.
Who's taking great pleasure in getting out there. And, of course, he's now in an election campaign. What do you make of what you're hearing from him?
Look, I think he's Captain Canada. I think that he's de facto our prime minister right now because, as you just said, he's been active in the U.S. media, doing interview with CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. Even this morning, as Premier Legault was meeting with certain stakeholders and some groups, he was in front of the Chamber of Commerce, delivering a keynote there. So I think that a lot of people now in the U.S. must think that he's the Canadian Prime Minister right now and not the Premier of Ontario. But look, he's been very vocal. But don't forget that he's also chair of the Council of the Federation. So it kind of gave him a way to be more active. But I think that he's doing a great job. And I think his message is also resonating in the U.S. But who's going to listen to him? It must be Donald Trump. And for the moment, Donald Trump, I think, said that it's going to happen. The good news, in a way, and it's a very, very small good news, is that for steel and aluminum, it's not only Canada that is being targeted. All countries in the world have been targeted. It's not like before where it was Mexico, Canada, and China. Now the U.S. is targeting everyone when it comes to steel and aluminum. But for Canada, it's one of our biggest exports.
Yeah, this is one of those moments where, the rest of the world, because everyone who is importing or exporting that to the U.S., as you just said, is now involved. You wonder if they can all get together and push back if there's enough there.
No, I think that the game plan of Mr. Trump is that he wants some companies to invest in the U.S. to close their plants either in Canada, either in Mexico, either in other countries, for example, and to establish in the U.S. But let's face it, you don't build a smelter in 6 months or anything. I mean, it takes years and years. And especially our aluminum is good. It comes from hydro. It's a green aluminum, so it's good for the environment. But all of that are not arguments that resonates with Donald Trump.
Yeah, by the way, to that idea, and I heard him say this again about having your companies, he was talking about Canada, come and open here. What does that mean? That we would, take a Canadian steel company or aluminum company, move it to the U.S., build it there, and what happens? Those Canadian jobs are gone because their jobs will be taken by Americans? How would that even work?
Yeah, I mean, yes, he wants to disrupt the supply chain. And look, when I was in government, we had a talking point, which was, come to Canada, establish a company in Canada, you'll have access to the two largest markets, U.S. and Europe, because we have a free trade agreement with both those countries. Now what he wants to do is actually put walls, and so companies, they will face a tariff, when it crosses the border. But the problem is that the auto sectors, parts go from the U.S. to Canada and Canada to the U.S. 5 or 6 times they cross the border in terms of parts. So what? Are you going to add each time it crosses the border another 25% and another 25%? It doesn't make any sense. So look, it's going to be very difficult. But yes, to answer your question, he wants some companies, especially in the auto sectors, that are in Mexico or that are in Canada, that are using aluminum or steel, Canadian aluminum or steel, to move to the U.S. because it will be too expensive for them to produce in Canada because of those tariffs.
Is that pie in the sky? That can't happen, right?
I'm sorry?
That can't happen. That's not going to happen.
Look, we'll see what happens. But I think that future investment, not past investment, I don't think that a company is going to move tomorrow. But when you look at future projects, for example, expansions or things like this, some companies will say, look, we're not going to do our expansion in Canada, or we're just going to make our facility or our footprint in Canada smaller. Mm-hmm. And if we have new plants or new expansion, we'll just have to do it to the U.S. Some companies are already delaying some investment because they say, look, we need to have now a base in the U.S. We cannot use what we used to do, which was Canada, and have to move it to the U.S. We have to build or manufacture in the U.S.
Yeah. Rudy, for people who did not hear, speaking of Doug Ford, as we did a minute ago, right, who came out, I think this was yesterday, just a very, very short clip, and said this.
We aren't going to roll over. There's one thing that President Trump has underestimated. The will of the Canadian people, the will of our government, you know, how proud the people are here in Ontario and in Canada, the resilience, and that we're fighters. I'll tell you one thing, we're no Mexico, we're no Colombia, we're no Panama, we're Canada. And if it comes our way, which a fight we never started, a fight that we don't want, but when someone, you know, gives you a pop in the nose, they're going to get that pop twice as hard back. I'll tell you that.
Captain Canada. All right, Rudy, thank you so much.